Let go to grow old lightly. 6 stones to set down for inner peace Buddhism. Have you ever felt a heaviness in your chest that no sleep, no success, and no distraction could take away? It arrives quietly in the middle of the night when the world has fallen silent and you are left alone with your thoughts. You turn from side to side, wondering why your heart feels so burdened, why the weight grows heavier with each passing year, even though you've achieved so much and done everything you were told would make life fulfilling. We often call this aging, as though the number of years behind us is the source of this invisible weight. But if you listen closely, age is not the heaviest burden. The real weight comes from the things we carry inside us, the regrets we replay in our minds, the expectations that were never met, the masks we've worn to be accepted, and the attachments we refuse to release. These are the silent stones in our hearts, and over time they become heavier than the years themselves. The Buddha once taught 3 simple truths. Everything changes, nothing lasts forever, and the self we cling to is never fixed. Yet most of our suffering arises not from change itself, but from resisting it, from clinging to the life we thought we should have had, to people we thought would stay, to versions of ourselves that no longer exist. We ache not because the years pass, but because we refuse to set down the stories, wounds, and expectations we have carried for so long. This journey we are beginning together is an invitation to finally lay down those burdens. It is about letting go of the stones you've carried for decades, the relationships that hurt you but you can't release, the fear of growing older and losing your place in the world, the endless comparisons with your younger self, the habit of waiting for others to bring you happiness, the belief that your time to learn and grow has passed, and the regrets that whisper to you in the quiet hours. These are the weights that keep your spirit restless, the barriers that stand between you and true peace. But you don't have to carry them anymore. You are allowed to set them down. You are allowed to choose lightness, to breathe freely, and to walk into this next chapter of your life without dragging the past behind you. This video is not just another collection of ideas. It is a guide woven from timeless Buddhist wisdom and real stories of transformation, created to help you return to yourself. I invite you to stay with me until the very end because each lesson builds upon the one before it. And by the time we reach the last chapter, you will see aging, change, and even yourself through a new lens. You'll understand that peace is not something to chase, but something that arises naturally when we finally stop holding on. So take a deep breath, gently place your hand over your heart and whisper to yourself, "This moment is enough. I am enough." As you follow this journey, let your mind stay open, let your heart stay soft, and allow yourself to imagine what life might feel like if you walked a little lighter, freer, and more at peace than ever before. And if these words resonate with you, I encourage you to stay until the very end of this video because what lies ahead may change the way you see your life, your past, and your future. When you finish, I'd love for you to share your reflections in the comments. Tell me which part of your life you're ready to release, which stone you want to set down first. Your story may inspire someone else who needs this message today. If this video speaks to your heart, give it a like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapters on mindfulness, Buddhist wisdom, and finding freedom in every stage of life. Your journey begins now. Stay with me. Chapter 1, Stone 1. Letting go of harmful relationships. There's a teaching from the Buddha that I come back to again and again. Holding on to anger, resentment, or toxic attachments is like holding a hot coal. We clutch it tightly, thinking we're protecting ourselves or even punishing someone else, but in truth, we are the ones getting burned. This is one of the most misunderstood lessons in Buddhism. Many of us were raised to believe that love means loyalty at all costs, that compassion means sacrificing ourselves again and again. But true compassion, the kind the Buddha taught, is not about abandoning your own well-being. It is about seeing clearly where love can grow and where it cannot. It is about releasing what causes harm, so your heart can remain open, soft, and free. I once met a woman named Marta, 72 years old, who hosts Sunday dinners for her family. She wakes up early every week, shops for fresh vegetables, and cooks the recipes her mother passed down to her. But every Sunday, when her eldest son walks through the door, the air changes. He criticizes everything: the food, the house, the neighbors, even the news playing softly on the television. And every Sunday, Marta feels smaller, as though her effort, her love, and even her presence are not enough. One Sunday, Marta quietly places a spare plate at the table with a folded napkin. When her son begins to complain, she speaks softly. "This plate is for peace. If anyone isn't hungry for peace today, the chair can rest." The first week, her son storms out. The second week, he sulks in silence. But by the third Sunday, he arrives early and chops carrots beside her. Nothing magical happened. Marta didn't change who she was. She simply stopped feeding the cycle of harm. By creating a gentle boundary, she chose her peace without closing her heart. This is what it means to let go with compassion. It is not about shutting people out or cutting ties in anger. It is about recognizing when holding on keeps us trapped in suffering, and then choosing to stop clutching the hot coal. There is another story I carry with me, one from a Buddhist monastery in Thailand. A young monk once asked his teacher, "Master, how do I know when to let someone go?" The teacher handed him a cup of water and asked him to squeeze it as tightly as he could. The monk gripped it hard, his knuckles turning white, until water spilled from every side. Finally, exhausted, he set the cup down. The teacher smiled gently and said, "Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop holding so tightly that you spill your own life away." You see, compassion does not require you to accept endless harm. Forgiveness does not mean staying where your spirit is constantly bruised. In fact, true loving kindness begins with yourself. Without it, any kindness you give to others will eventually burn out, leaving only exhaustion and resentment behind. And yet, letting go does not always mean walking away. Sometimes, it simply means choosing different boundaries. It may mean visiting less often, choosing silence instead of conflict, or no longer engaging in arguments that go nowhere. Other times, it may mean creating distance for your own healing while still holding space for love. The Buddha taught that everything we cling to, people, roles, expectations, will eventually change. When we resist this truth, we suffer. But when we accept it, something opens. A heavy burden lifts. Life breathes again. Letting go with compassion creates room for something new to enter, healthier connections, deeper self-respect, and a love that nourishes instead of drains you. I once guided a man named Aaron through this same practice. At 65, he spent years trying to repair a friendship that had grown toxic. Every call left him frustrated, every visit ended in guilt. One day I asked him, "When you leave this person's presence, do you feel lighter or heavier?" He didn't even pause before whispering, "Heavier." That moment was his turning point. He didn't walk away in anger. He simply chose to stop carrying the weight. Months later, he discovered a community of people who celebrated him as he was, a reminder that sometimes we have to close one door for another to open. If you are carrying a relationship right now that constantly drains you, I want you to remember this: letting go is not rejection. It is an act of love for yourself and even for the other person. When you release someone from your grasp, you also release them from your expectations, your frustration, your silent resentments. You allow both of you to breathe. Take a moment now if you can. Place your hand gently on your heart. Feel your breath move in and out. Whisper softly, "May I be safe. May I be free from harm." And when you exhale, imagine setting down one small stone you've been carrying. It could be a resentment, a memory, or even an unspoken expectation. You don't have to put it all down today. Just loosen your grip even a little. Letting go with compassion is not about closing your heart. It is about opening a gate through which healthier love, truer connection, and genuine joy can finally enter your life. Relationships are teachers. Some arrive to stay, some to guide, and others simply to show us where we need to heal. When we cling to what hurts us, we mistake loyalty for love. But when we choose compassion for ourselves and others, we stop confusing suffering with devotion. The Buddha once said, "You, yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." When you finally believe this, you will understand that setting boundaries is not betrayal. It is wisdom. It is freedom. It is the first step toward peace. Chapter 2, Stone 2, Softening the Fear of Aging. In Buddhism, the Buddha often reminded us of anicca, the truth of impermanence. Everything changes. The seasons shift. Rivers carve new paths, mountains wear down into soft valleys, and the body follows its own natural rhythm. Aging, therefore, is not a failure, not a punishment, not a sign of decline. It is a mirror of life itself, a reminder that we are part of a greater flow. And yet, for so many of us, aging becomes a silent fear, something we try to hide, fight, or deny. We live in a culture that worships youth. Advertisements whisper constantly that wrinkles are flaws, gray hair is loss, slower steps are decline, and beauty belongs only to the young. But this is not the way of the Dharma. The Buddha saw life differently. He taught that within change there is a deeper beauty, one that youth cannot know. To grow older is not to fade. It is to ripen, to bloom into a kind of wisdom that no cream, surgery, or exercise can create. I once met Mr. Rao, a 76-year-old tailor who had spent 5 decades measuring fabrics, cutting patterns, and shaping clothes for others. After retiring, he no longer used his measuring tape for sleeves or waistlines. Instead, he began measuring life itself. 10 minutes of morning sunlight on his balcony, 20 slow breaths after lunch, 30 deliberate steps to his garden gate. When I asked him why, he smiled and said, "My body shrinks, yes, but my capacity to notice grows larger." Mr. Rao didn't fight aging, he befriended it. He stopped chasing the energy of youth and began cultivating the awareness that comes only with time. And this, I believe, is one of the greatest secrets of Buddhist practice. That presence is more precious than permanence. I once heard a Zen story about an old master admired for his strength and vitality. In his later years, his students noticed his steps becoming slower, his hands trembling as he poured tea. One day, a young monk asked gently, "Master, does it sadden you that your body fails you now?" The teacher placed his palm over his heart, smiled softly, and said, "The body is the lantern. The oil runs low, the flame flickers, but the light itself, do you not still see it burning?" The Buddha himself faced aging directly. In his later teachings, he reminded his followers, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your liberation with diligence." He never denied that the body changes, the wrinkles, the gray hair, the aching knees, but he urged us to see beyond the surface, to touch the light within which is untouched by time. Aging reveals a new kind of freedom if we allow it. In youth, we chase endlessly success, admiration, approval, achievements. There is a constant hunger to be seen, to be remembered, to matter. But as the years pass, something else begins to soften. The endless chase quiets, and in its place comes a greater appreciation for stillness. The way sunlight filters through old trees, the quiet joy of holding a grandchild's hand, the simple gratitude for another morning, another breath. I remember guiding a meditation retreat once where a 70-year-old woman named Alina shared her story. She said, "For years I feared growing old. I counted every wrinkle, every strand of gray hair. But then one day I looked at my hands and thought, these hands have held my children, built my home, cooked meals for friends, wiped tears, and touched the people I love. How can I call them old when they've carried so much life?" Her fear dissolved not because time reversed, but because her perspective transformed. When we release the fear of aging, we step into something far more valuable: acceptance. And acceptance does not mean resignation. It means recognizing the beauty of what is here now, instead of clinging to what has passed or chasing what hasn't yet come. Take a moment now and look at your own hands. Notice the lines, the textures, the strength that remains. Think of all the things these hands have done, the letters they've written, the doors they've opened, the embraces they've given, the work they've accomplished. Each mark and wrinkle is not a sign of decline. It is a story of resilience. Whisper softly to yourself, "Nothing is missing when I am present." And perhaps this is the deepest lesson. There is nothing wrong with autumn. The leaves change color, the air turns cool, and yet we do not demand that spring apologize for leaving. Aging is the same. The seasons of our lives shift, but each one carries its own beauty, its own purpose, its own grace. The fear of aging comes from forgetting who we are beyond the body. Youth is fleeting, yes, but wisdom deepens. Outer strength may fade, but the light of awareness, the part of you that observes, feels, and loves, remains untouched. To grow older is not to lose yourself. It is to come home to yourself. The Buddha reminds us that everything changes, and within this change lies our greatest freedom. When we stop fighting time and start living fully inside each passing moment, we discover that nothing essential is ever lost. Chapter 3, Stone 3, Ending the Contest with Your Younger Self. There is a quiet kind of suffering that many people carry but rarely speak about. It hides behind smiles, behind routines, even behind achievements. It is the subtle, persistent longing for the person we used to be, the body that moved faster, the mind that felt sharper, the face that carried fewer lines. Comparison is a thief, and sometimes the thief lives inside us. We compare who we are today to who we once were, and no matter what we have accomplished, the present always feels like it falls short. But the truth is this: youth and age are not enemies, they are chapters in the same book. Youth gives us speed and strength, yes, but age offers strategy, patience, depth, and understanding. The journey of life is not a race to win. It is a pilgrimage to walk one step at a time, one breath at a time, one lesson at a time. I once met a woman named Elaine at a meditation retreat. In her 40s, she was a marathon runner. Her medals lined the shelves of her home, her running shoes bright, quick, and winged. But by the time I met her in her 60s, arthritis had settled into her knees, slowing her pace and forcing her to trade her marathons for long, quiet walks. She bought herself a pair of sturdy walking shoes, wide toe box, steady sole, nothing flashy. But she couldn't bring herself to throw away her old running shoes. One evening, Elaine placed both pairs side by side, the fast and the steady, the bright and the simple, and she bowed to them. "Thank you," she said softly to the old shoes. "You carried me here." And then she turned to the new shoes and whispered, "Thank you for taking me onward." In that moment, her shame dissolved. She stopped fighting the years and began walking with them. Her pilgrimage continued, lighter than before. This is what Buddhist teachings invite us to do, to stop wounding ourselves with comparisons. In the Salatha Sutta, the Buddha described what he called the two arrows. The first arrow is inevitable, the physical pain, the changes in the body, the slowing of steps, the dimming of eyesight. But the second arrow is self-inflicted, the thoughts that whisper, "I am less valuable now. I am no longer who I used to be." You cannot avoid the first arrow, but you can refuse to pick up the second. The wrinkles, the gray hair, the slower reflexes, these are not failures. They are simply the body's way of moving with time. It is our attachment to an older version of ourselves that turns natural change into suffering. I remember speaking with a man named Samuel, 71 years old, who once built his identity around his physical strength. In his 20s and 30s, he worked construction, carried heavy loads, climbed ladders without effort. But now, even small tasks left him winded, and he confessed to me, "I feel useless. My body betrayed me." We sat together in silence for a moment before I asked him, "What did your younger self know that you know better now?" He thought for a long time, and then his eyes softened. "Back then, I knew how to build houses," he said quietly. "But now I know how to build patience. Back then, I could lift weight. Now I can lift people up." That is the invitation, to see that each stage of life carries its own form of strength. The energy of youth is a gift, yes, but the wisdom of age is another. You are not meant to compete with who you were. You are meant to grow into who you are now. Comparison also blinds us to the impermanence of life. That younger version of you that you hold so tightly to. They are gone, just as one season gives way to the next. And that is not a tragedy. It is the rhythm of existence. The river never apologizes for flowing forward, and the trees do not grieve when their leaves change color. Life is motion, and motion is life. One practice I often suggest is to write 2 letters. The first, a gratitude letter to your younger self. Thank them for their energy, their choices, their courage, their mistakes, all of which carried you here. The second, a welcome note to your current self. Acknowledge the wisdom you hold now, the patience you've earned, the depth you've cultivated through time and experience. When you do this, you shift from mourning the person you used to be to honoring the person you are becoming. Instead of seeing age as loss, you begin to see it as transformation. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to forgive yourself for not knowing then what you know now, for choices made and paths not taken. This forgiveness is freedom. It loosens the grip of the past and allows you to live fully in the present moment, exactly as you are. The Buddha once said, "You are not meant to stay the same. Change is not only possible, it is inevitable. But change does not diminish you, it expands you. The lines on your face are rivers of experience. The silver in your hair is moonlight resting gently on your crown. Each year adds depth to the story only you can tell. You are not here to replay an old role. You are here to embody a new one, the role of the wise one, the guide, the teacher, the storyteller, the compassionate witness. When you stop measuring your present against your past, you discover that life softens. Time becomes a companion rather than an enemy, and peace finally has room to enter. Place your hand over your heart and take one deep, slow breath. Whisper softly, "I am not who I was, and I do not need to be. I am exactly who I am meant to be." Chapter 4, Stone 4, Reclaiming Your Joy. There is a quiet truth the Buddha taught long ago. Happiness is not something that arrives from the outside. It is something we cultivate from within. We spend so much of our lives waiting for the right person, the right job, the right circumstances, the right timing. We wait for others to bring us joy, to make us feel whole, to validate our worth. But waiting for happiness is like waiting for a flower to bloom in a garden we never tend. The Buddha spoke of right effort, a practice at the heart of the Eightfold Path, which teaches us that joy does not happen by accident. It is nurtured, cultivated, and maintained with intention. There are 4 parts to right effort: preventing unwholesome states from arising, abandoning those that do, cultivating wholesome states and maintaining them. In other words, happiness is not something we receive, it is something we garden. I once met Sheila at a retreat for grieving hearts. After her partner of 30 years passed away, she moved into a small apartment overlooking a blank brick wall. Every morning she woke to the same view, and the emptiness in her room mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. One day, a neighbor stopped by and gently suggested she add a window box. With nothing to lose, Sheila agreed. She planted basil, lavender, and cherry tomatoes. At first, she watered them mechanically, just something to fill the hours. But over time, something shifted. She began to notice the scent of lavender drifting into her room, the tiny green shoots pushing toward the sun, the ripening of tomatoes under her fingertips. The brick wall never changed, but the world behind her window transformed. As she tended her plants, she realized she was also tending her heart. Grief is real, but so is agency. Buddhism teaches us that joy and sorrow are not opposites, they are intertwined. We cannot avoid pain, but we can learn to touch moments of happiness even within difficulty. The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within, do not seek it without." This doesn't mean ignoring life's hardships. It means remembering that even in the midst of suffering, there is always something we can nourish, a small act, a mindful breath, a gesture of kindness that brings light into our lives. I once spoke with a man named Thomas, who had spent years working 60-hour weeks to provide for his family. When he retired, he confessed to me, "I thought happiness would come when I stopped working, but now I just feel empty." I asked him what brought him joy when he was younger, and he said without hesitation, music. But he hadn't touched his guitar in 30 years. The next week he picked it up again, slowly relearning old chords. Over time, he began playing at a local community center on Sunday afternoons. He told me, "I thought I was too old to start again, but happiness isn't about age, it's about attention." This is the heart of the teaching. Joy is an active practice, not a passive gift. We cannot control the weather of life, but we can open the blinds to let the light in. If you want to reclaim your joy, begin with the smallest acts. Pour yourself a cup of tea and drink it slowly, without distraction. No television, no phone, no rush. Taste the warmth on your tongue. Feel the weight of the cup in your hand. Notice the rising steam and let your body rest in its presence. That one cup of tea, fully experienced, can become a doorway into peace. Or take what I call a kindness walk. Go outside with no other purpose but to look for 3 opportunities to help. Hold the door for someone, smile at a stranger, carry a bag for an elderly neighbor. Joy arises naturally when we soften into connection because in helping others, we reconnect with the part of ourselves that remembers we are never truly separate. And before you go to bed, try sending a 10-word gratitude message to someone in your life. It could be as simple as, "Thinking of you, thank you for being in my life." Studies have shown that expressing gratitude rewires the brain to notice beauty, connection, and possibility. But beyond science, it awakens something ancient in us, the recognition that happiness grows when it's shared. There is another story I carry with me about a man named Hiroshi, a retired teacher in Kyoto. After his wife passed, he began making tiny paper cranes each morning. At first, it was a way to pass the time, but as the weeks passed, his apartment filled with hundreds of cranes. When I asked why he made them, he said, "Each crane reminds me that beauty doesn't erase sadness, but it can sit beside it." That is the essence of Buddhist joy, not the absence of sorrow, but the gentle coexistence of both. Happiness doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't require perfect circumstances or endless achievements. It's found in the scent of lavender outside Sheila's window, in the familiar chords of Thomas's guitar, in the delicate folds of Hiroshi's paper cranes. Joy is hidden inside small, intentional acts of care, cultivated moment by moment, choice by choice. We often think joy is something we must chase, but the truth is, joy blooms when we learn to slow down enough to notice it. The Buddha taught that happiness is not a reward waiting at the end of struggle. It is something we weave into the fabric of our lives through mindfulness, gratitude, and compassion. We cannot command the weather, but we can always open the blinds. When we understand this, we stop waiting for life to deliver happiness to us. We become gardeners of our own inner world. And when we tend to it gently, patiently, consistently, we discover that joy has been here all along, waiting quietly beneath the surface, ready to grow wherever we choose to plant it. Chapter 5, Stone 5, Keeping the Mind Young. In Buddhism, one of the most beautiful teachings is the idea of shashan, the beginner's mind. It is the willingness to meet every moment as though it's the first time with openness, curiosity, and humility. A mind that stays curious never truly grows old. The body may change, the seasons of life may shift, but the spirit remains vibrant when it learns to see the world with fresh eyes. The Buddha taught that wisdom is not a final destination. It is a practice, a way of living. When we believe we've already learned everything we need to know, the mind becomes rigid like a sealed jar that cannot receive water. But when we stay open, receptive, and curious, we discover that life is always teaching us, through every conversation, every sound, every sunrise, every wrinkle on our skin. I once met Jonas, an 80-year-old grandfather whose granddaughter introduced him to smartphone photography. At first, he laughed at the idea, at my age, what would I need pictures for? But she showed him how to capture images, and slowly his world began to expand. He started taking photos of his neighbor's dogs, fresh fruit at the market, and clouds reflected in puddles after the rain. A few months later, the local library hosted an exhibit called What the Elders See. Children stopped to look at Jonas's photos, images so simple, yet full of quiet beauty, and they smiled. Standing nearby, Jonas whispered softly, "I didn't know curiosity could taste like this." This is the essence of beginner's mind, discovering wonder where we once stopped noticing. Jonas didn't just learn a new skill, he learned to see again. There's a Zen story about an old master named Haruto, well into his 80s, who continued practicing his morning rituals with unwavering dedication. One day, a young student asked him, "Master, why do you still perform the same routines every day when you've done them thousands of times?" Haruto smiled and said, "Because today I have never done them before." This is the freedom that comes when we loosen our grip on certainty. When we think we already know, we stop truly seeing. But when we approach life with fresh eyes, even familiar things become new. The sound of birds in the morning, the warmth of tea in our hands, the kindness in a stranger's smile, they are always here, waiting to be noticed. The Buddha compared the human mind to a lotus flower. The lotus blooms not in spite of the mud, but because of it. The mud represents the struggles, mistakes, and challenges of life. And yet from that very soil, something extraordinary rises. Likewise, our experiences, no matter how messy or painful, are the very conditions that allow wisdom and compassion to bloom. I once spoke with May, a 75-year-old retired teacher who decided to learn the harmonica after her husband passed away. "It's strange," she told me, laughing. "I spent 50 years teaching children, and yet I never thought I'd become a student again." At first, she struggled, her breath uneven, her fingers awkward, but with patience she began to create music. One afternoon, she played for her grandchildren, and they danced around the living room, clapping and laughing. Tears welled in her eyes as she said, "I thought my days of learning were over. I was wrong." Keeping the mind young isn't about chasing every new trend or refusing to grow older. It's about staying open to questions, to wonder, to discovery, and to being surprised. When we believe we are finished growing, life becomes smaller. But when we allow ourselves to be students of life again, we find that there are infinite doors still waiting to open. If you wish to keep your mind vibrant, begin gently. Learn a short chant or mantra of loving kindness and repeat it each morning. May I be safe, may I be well, may I live with ease. These simple words, spoken with intention, soften the heart and create space for compassion, both for yourself and others. Or give yourself a 10-day tiny skill challenge. Try painting, gardening, playing the harmonica, or writing a poem each day. Choose something small and joyful, not because you need to master it, but because the act of learning itself awakens parts of the mind that have been quiet for too long. Community, too, can breathe life into the spirit. Join a local circle, maybe a photo walk Wednesday group, a tea and poems gathering, or simply a few neighbors who meet once a week for mindful walks. When we share curiosity with others, it multiplies. We begin to see the world not only through our own eyes but through theirs, expanding the horizon of what's possible. I once asked an elderly monk, nearly 90, how he managed to keep his joy and clarity after so many decades of practice. He smiled and said, "Every day I ask the world to teach me something new. Every day it does." That is the secret. The willingness to keep learning, to keep opening, to keep wondering. Aging does not diminish us. Closing our minds does. The body may choose a cane, but the mind can still dance. Beginner's mind, Shashan, is the invitation to stay awake to life, to remain a student of existence no matter how many seasons we've seen. If you let curiosity guide you, you will find that there are still countless songs left to learn, countless stories yet to hear, countless moments waiting quietly for you to notice them. The world has not finished teaching you, and you have not finished living. Chapter 6, Stone 6, Turning Regret into Compassion. In Buddhism, regret is not an enemy. It is a signal, a quiet reminder from the heart that we are alive, that we care, and that we are capable of growth. The Buddha never taught us to run from regret or bury it beneath distractions. He taught us to meet it with compassion, to hold it gently until it transforms. Regret shows us where our conscience still breathes, but when we cling to it too tightly, it becomes a prison instead of a teacher. There's a famous teaching in the Dharma about the raft. The raft carries us safely across the river, saving us from drowning. But once we reach the other side, we are free to lay it down. We don't need to drag it with us into the forest. In the same way, the past, with all its mistakes, choices, and wounds, carried us to where we are today. It is precious, yes, but it is not meant to be carried forever. I once met Priya, a retired hospital administrator in her late 60s. She came to a meditation retreat burdened by decades of guilt. In her younger years, she made decisions at work that, in hindsight, she wished she had handled differently. "I hurt people," she whispered. "I chose ambition over kindness. I wasted so much of my life." Her shoulders trembled as she spoke, as though she had been carrying invisible stones for years. Her teacher suggested a practice. "Write 2 letters, he said. The first to those you believe you harmed, the second to your younger self. Priya wrote for hours, pouring her heart into the pages, apologies, memories, and unspoken truth she had locked away. When she finished, she folded both letters into paper boats and released them into a quiet stream behind the retreat center. The letters drifted away slowly, carried by the current. Priya stood watching until they disappeared beyond the bend. "I thought I had to erase the past to find peace," she said softly, "but now I see I only had to forgive it." After the retreat, she began volunteering at a free medical clinic, using her skills to care for those who couldn't afford treatment. The past didn't vanish, it ripened into service. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering without the poison. It is holding your past with tenderness, not judgment. It is saying to yourself, "I did the best I could with what I knew then. Now I know better and I will live better." In Buddhist practice, turning regret into compassion often begins with naming it. When we resist regret, it burrows deeper, festering like an untended wound. But when we name it plainly, "I regret the way I spoke to my father. I regret not pursuing my dreams. I regret the harm I caused when I wasn't aware," we bring it into the light where healing can begin. The second step is atonement. This does not always mean confronting the person directly. Sometimes that is not possible or even wise, but it means taking responsibility where we can, offering an apology, making restitution if appropriate, or simply changing our behavior so that we no longer repeat the same patterns. As Thich, NH letter 1EA5T, H letter 1EA1NH once said, "The best apology is living differently." And the third step is dedicating merit, transforming the energy of regret into acts of goodness. This is a practice rooted deeply in Buddhist tradition. When we feel the weight of past mistakes, we can choose to offer kindness to the world in the name of healing. Volunteer at a shelter, plant a tree, listen to someone in pain, donate anonymously to a cause that matters. Every act becomes a silent prayer. May this serve as a bridge from what I was to who I choose to be. I once knew a man named David, a retired veteran who carried deep remorse over choices he made in war. For decades, he kept his stories locked inside, afraid of judgment. When he finally began attending a Buddhist sangha, he heard a monk say, "Regret is not punishment. It is your invitation to love better now." David began volunteering at a halfway house for homeless veterans, offering mentorship and companionship. He told me, "I can't change what happened, but I can make sure my past shapes me into someone gentler, someone useful." This is how regret becomes compassion, when it teaches us to serve, to connect, and to soften toward others because we know what it means to stumble. If you are holding regret right now, place your hand gently over your heart. Close your eyes for a moment and take a slow, steady breath. Whisper softly to yourself, "I forgive you. I forgive the younger me who didn't know better. I choose to learn and I choose to love." You do not need to carry the raft any longer. You can lay it down, not to erase where you've been, but to walk lighter toward where you are going. Regret is not proof of failure. It is proof that your heart is alive. It shows that you care, that you've grown, that you've learned. When met with compassion, regret transforms into wisdom, and wisdom becomes a gift for yourself and for others. The Buddha once said, "You yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." When you begin to believe this, forgiveness stops being a task and becomes a doorway to freedom, to self-compassion, and to a deeper love for all beings. Regret is not a life sentence. It is a compass. Let it guide you, but do not let it cage you. Chapter 7, Walking Lightly. Your next chapter begins. Take a moment and imagine placing 6 stones in front of you. Each one represents something you've carried for years, perhaps even decades. The first stone is the weight of harmful ties, relationships that once promised love but now bring pain. The second is the fear of aging, the quiet anxiety that time is moving faster than you can hold it. The third is the endless comparison with others, with your younger self, with versions of life that never came to be. The fourth stone is the habit of outsourcing your joy, waiting for others to make you feel complete. The fifth is a closed mind, the belief that there is nothing new left to learn, no more wonder left to experience. And the sixth is regret, the silent ache of choices you wish you'd made differently, of words left unsaid, of moments you cannot return to. See these stones clearly. Hold them in your imagination. Feel their weight in your hands, and then slowly, one by one, set them down. With each stone, notice how your shoulders relax, how your breath deepens, how your chest feels just a little lighter. This is not about denying your past. It's about releasing the parts of it that keep you from living fully now. The Buddha often compared life to crossing a vast river. Along the way, we build a raft made of our experiences, our beliefs, our identities, even our pain. That raft carries us safely to this shore, but once we arrive, we are free to set it down. Carrying it further only exhausts us. In the same way, the stones you've been holding have served their purpose. They taught you lessons, shaped your compassion, and led you here to this moment where you have the chance to begin again. I once met a woman named Elena at a silent retreat in Northern California. She was 74, soft-spoken, with kind eyes that carried decades of stories. During one group reflection, she shared how she had spent half her life clinging to an identity she no longer recognized. "I was the caregiver, the fixer, the strong one," she said. "But somewhere along the way I forgot how to care for myself." At the retreat, she imagined placing each role she had carried, daughter, wife, mother, nurse, into the shape of 6 stones before her. One by one, she released them, saying softly, "Thank you. You got me here. But now I need to walk lighter." Afterward, she began waking each day with a new ritual. Sitting by her kitchen window, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, whispering to herself, "I choose peace today." She didn't change her entire life overnight. What changed was the weight she chose not to carry anymore. This is what letting go feels like. It isn't sudden and it isn't loud. It's quiet, subtle, gentle. It's waking up one morning and realizing the burden you thought you needed to hold has already started to loosen its grip. When we release what no longer serves us, something beautiful happens. Space appears. Space for new relationships, new ideas, new moments of joy that might have passed unnoticed. Space to breathe. Space to simply be. Buddhism teaches that everything is impermanent: the pain, the fear, the comparisons, the regrets. None of them are fixed. None of them define you. The self you believe you are is not the self you were 20 years ago, nor the one you will be 20 years from now. This truth isn't meant to frighten us, it's meant to free us. Because if everything changes, then every moment carries the possibility of renewal. There is a story from a Zen monastery about a young monk struggling with regret. He confessed to his teacher, "I've made mistakes I can't undo. I feel trapped by my past." The teacher poured tea into his cup until it overflowed, spilling onto the table. "Master," the monk exclaimed, "it's too full." The teacher smiled gently and said, "Exactly. There is no space for anything new if you don't first empty the cup." In this moment, you are invited to empty your own cup, not by erasing the past, but by loosening your grip on it. The river continues forward, the seasons shift, and you too can begin again, lighter, freer, and more open to the unfolding path ahead. Take one more breath. Place your hand gently on your heart. Feel it beating, steady and strong, reminding you that you are still here, still alive, still capable of change. Whisper softly to yourself, "I choose to walk lightly. I choose peace. I choose freedom." Now choose just one stone to set down this week. Maybe it's a lingering regret. Maybe it's the constant self-judgment. Maybe it's the fear that you are running out of time. You don't have to release them all today. One stone is enough. And as you walk forward, may you carry this blessing in your heart. May any calm I've touched flow toward those who are hurting. May any wisdom I've glimpsed become food for someone hungry. May all beings everywhere be free. Because your journey doesn't end here. In many ways, it begins here. Each stone you release clears the path before you, making space for the life that is waiting. The one you can only receive with open hands and an open heart.